For non-natives, the unknown of the frontier-era North American West fostered the popularity of countless myths, legends, tall tales, and less-than-accurate histories. William F. Cody, also known as Buffalo Bill, is a prime example as he and others spun wild tales of his supposed mid to late 19th century exploits. At the same time, the members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or LDS Church or Mormons, had many wild tales told about them as they settled in the Great Basin and around the West. And unbeknownst to many, the histories of the two are actually deeply intertwined. Welcome to Writing Westward. I'm your host, Brent. This month we talk with historian Brent M. Rogers about his new book, Buffalo Bill and the Mormons. And we learn about Cody's interactions with the LDS Church, his early contributions to their negative public image, his later collaborations with them, and some questionable analogies regarding Taylor Swift. Thanks for listening. For new listeners, here's a brief introduction to the podcast and myself. Writing Westward is supported by the Charles Redd Center for Western Studies at Brigham Young University, where I, Brennan Rensink, serve as Associate Director and I'm a Professor of History. For better or worse, this podcast is a one-man operation. I'm the host, producer, sound engineer, and everything else, all roles for which I have zero training. But I am passionate about the North American West, and I'll take just about any excuse to read more books and talk to interesting people who are writing about the region. Each episode features a conversation with them, historians, journalists, novelists, poets, scientists, sociologists, and others. The goal of these exchanges is to spark your curiosity, to think more deeply about the region, its lands and environments, and the histories and experiences of the people who have called it home. If a guest intrigues you, you can find links to their work in the show notes, or at writingwestward.org. And if you have a moment, please subscribe and leave reviews wherever you get your podcasts. Share links with friends. Follow us on Facebook and X or Twitter, and send in feedback. At the end of this episode, I'll include some more information about my own scholarship and about the Redd Center, our programming and projects, and funding opportunities that you could apply for. That's right, we may want to give you money. And with that, let me introduce who we are talking to this month and why. Brent M. Rogers is managing historian of the LDS Church History Department in Salt Lake City. He holds a PhD in history from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, an MA in public history from Sacramento State University, and a BA in history from San Diego State University. One of his first publications, a 2014 Utah Historical Quarterly article on Mormons and federal Indian policy, won the Western History Association's Arrington Pruka Prize for the best article on the history of religion in the West. His first book, published in 2017 by the University of Nebraska Press, Unpopular Sovereignty, Mormons and the Federal Management of Early Utah Territory, won the 2018 Best First Book Award from the Mormon History Association, the Francis Armstrong Madsen Best Book Award from the Utah State Historical Society, and the Charles Redd Center Phi Alpha Theta Book Award for the Best Book on the American West. He has authored numerous other pieces and is an editor on 6 volumes of the Joseph Smith Papers Project, many of which have also won awards. In his new book, Buffalo Bill and the Mormons, published by the Bison Books imprint of the University of Nebraska Press just this year in 2024, Rogers reveals the significant historical entanglements of the famed frontiersman and showman William F. Cody, or Buffalo Bill, and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the LDS Church, or Mormons as they've been popularly known, who settled in the Great Basin during the mid to late 19th century. The histories of each, Cody and the Mormons, are very well known, with shelf-breaking numbers of books written on each. However, and somewhat shockingly to be honest, little has been said of where and how significantly those histories intersect. Rogers demonstrates that they were not incidental or minor. In fact, Mormons factored prominently in Cody's early life as an entertainer and public figure, and were central to the settlement projects he undertook in his latter years. Rogers' book is beautifully written, presenting carefully researched and nuanced history in themes, structures, and language that are easily accessible to the general public. This is reflected by it being published by the public-oriented Bison Books imprint. As such, general readers will find the text engaging, insightful, and even humorous at points. Additionally, experts of Buffalo Bill, Mormon, or broader Western histories will likewise benefit from Rogers' work, as I suspect many will be astounded by how much these histories overlap, and how little we have realized that previously. His work is a powerful demonstration of how important the stories we tell and the stories that we do not tell are, in how we think about the past and ourselves today. Brent Rogers, welcome to Writing Westward.
Thank you for having me. I'm grateful and excited to be here.
I feel like we do need to disclose to the listeners that you and I have been friends for a very, very long time. And so if they feel uncomfortable with us teasing each other, if that happens over the course of the interview, I just feel like we need to at least state that so they know that we're actually on friendly terms.
Yeah. If there's any references to bison witches in Lincoln or the student housing on campus there in Nebraska, we've known each other for a long time. So I'm glad to have this opportunity to talk with a friend about my book.
Well, I often start by asking people how they came to their topic. And you write a funny anecdote in the acknowledgments where you had mentioned this project idea to a senior scholar, and they replied with, "Who the hell would care about that?" So can you connect for us some of the threads of your previous scholarship on Western and Mormon histories and how those led you to this topic as opposed to the myriad other topics you could have pursued?
Sure. I came to this topic because of opportunities that came before me in graduate school, really. I had a great opportunity to work with the papers of William F. Cody, or the William F. Cody Archive, that Professor Doug Seefelt was heading up at the University of Nebraska. And I mean, I had interests in Buffalo Bill and had been to some historic sites as a child that were connected with Cody. And so it was really a neat opportunity when I was in graduate school to be able to work on the papers. And I worked on particularly Buffalo Bill's development of the Congress of Rough Riders of the World. And it was that really got me scholarly invested in Buffalo Bill. And from there, I just worked on that project for a few years and really got interested in and knowing Buffalo Bill at a deeper level. And what I was working on for my dissertation was the place of Utah Territory in debates about popular sovereignty in the 1850s. And what kind of the culmination of that happened was the Utah War of 1857, 1858. You had the President of the United States who ran on a popular sovereignty platform and, sends the U.S. Army to expend federal dollars and federal force in Utah Territory, going against the popular sovereignty ideal very early in his presidency. Where Buffalo Bill connects with that is in his autobiography, which he wrote in 1879, or when he published it was 1879. He made claims to be part of the Teamsters and the wagon train that went out to support the U.S. Army during that war, during that expedition. And so that was always a curious thing to me, and reading in Louis Warren's biography and reading other historical pieces on Buffalo Bill that there was no evidence to verify that he was a part of that. And so the question of why he claimed to be a part of that big Army engagement against Latter-day Saints in 1857 was always curious to me. So I was thinking about these couple of things after I finished my first book, which was a revised version of my dissertation, which is titled Unpopular Sovereignty, Mormons and the Federal Management of Early Utah Territory. And just kind of wondering if there was something more that I could do with that question of, why would Buffalo Bill make that up? And why would he stick to that story? And is there more that we can find out about this relationship, this dynamic, or was that just it? And so I started to look into it. And I just kept finding new pieces of evidence that connected Buffalo Bill and Mormons from before even 1857 and to well after into the early 1900s, and just trying to put all of those pieces together. And where I was able to really get started on that was thanks to a nice fellowship from the Buffalo Bill Center of the West. And I went and spent a few weeks up in Cody, Wyoming in Buffalo Bill Cody's papers, and found a letter that Buffalo Bill wrote to Abraham Woodruff, who was a Latter-day Saint apostle at the time. And so they're, at this point, this is 1900, Buffalo Bill and the Mormons are sort of working together to do work in Northwest Wyoming. And so as I'm just finding these pieces, I'm asking more questions and trying to find the answers to them. And that series of research is what led to the book.
So I think it's interesting that your project started with this kind of dubious claim that he had been a part of Johnston's army, which seems maybe dubious because he only would have been 11 years old, which I guess maybe some kids were going out as logistical support with the Teamsters, but it does speak, I think, to his self-mythologizing and building his mythos. And, of course, like dime novels are written about him, and he doesn't do much to try to tamper any of that speculation down about wild and crazy adventures he had. But I see a parallel in this, in that, so in the moment, mid to late 19th century, in the moments that Buffalo Bill Cody and other Westerners are telling these tall tales, somewhat divorced from reality, perhaps, perceptions of Mormons in popular media in the 19th century, it also requires of you, the historian, like a lot of sorting out of fact and fiction. What are some of the claims or that were out there, during those, 30, 40, 50 years, the second half of the 19th century, about Mormons that are similarly a little divorced from reality?
It's a good question. There are a lot of tales. There's a lot of going on, just representation, perception, building that is happening in that time frame about all sorts of different people. The Latter-day Saints in particular were seen as a group of religious deviants. They were not viewed as mainstream Christian. They practiced openly plural marriage, which was a abhorred practice in 19th century America. And they had a large and growing population at sort of a crossroads of the American West. And so in a place that is separate enough that it's like, oh, we can just kind of talk about them, but critical enough that it grows in importance as the 19th century wears on. And as westward expansion starts filling in the spaces in the West, as settlements and colonies grow in the West, that group of people that's just hunkered down there in the Great Salt Lake Valley that are portrayed in these very negative terms as deviant and violent people. I mean, they're perceived as being willing to kidnap women and bring them into forced polygamous marriages, or to hold them in some sort of sexual slavery, or to kill anyone who stood in their way. These were the sort of things that were being pretty widely said and spread about Latter-day Saints, aside from whatever their religious beliefs were, but that they were a people who were dangerous. And so there's just these kind of a lot of really fictitious stories they're full of very daring, encounters with Latter-day Saints. Whether they it's talking about the female harems that Latter-day Saint patriarchs have, or these violent Mormon Danites who were looking to pursue and kill people who traveled through their territory. And I think that they're at that time, because of that growing that growing perception and those growing representations of who Mormons were, it really creates there's a lot of sensational storytelling that goes on around Latter-day Saints. And so they're seen as deviant. They're seen then as easy targets. And so people use, when I say people, I mean like writers and newspaper editors, people who are sort of the cultural influencers of the day.
I mean, as we'll get to, and Buffalo Bill.
And
himself.
Buffalo Bill.
And we'll get to that, but yeah.
jumps on this bandwagon, and he kind of just, jumps on because there's this overwhelmingly negative portrayal of Latter-day Saints that shapes the worldview of how people interact with it. And so Buffalo Bill can add himself into this story of going to war against the Mormons because people like see that and say, hey, that's great. Here's a guy that's willing to go fight for proper American values and proper American family. And it's just a stock, easy, negative stereotype to fight against. And so that's the cultural worldview that Americans and frankly, even Europeans have about Latter-day Saints in these decades that allows Buffalo Bill to say that without anyone fact checking him. They just go, oh, this guy is great. He's going to go fight against the Mormons.
Sex and violence sells, right?
Yep.
Even in the 19th century, just like it does today. And they were the easy target. I mean, so it's so fascinating that in his own self mythology, it says the Mormons are like at age 11, he is engaging with this expedition against the Mormons. So from day one, and then and we'll talk about this, but as you uncover, that's not the only moment. There's consistent entanglements between Cody and Latter-day Saints. And so, I mean, one of the big questions that I've always had, as I've heard you talk about this project for a few years, it's not. It's prominent, and if you look through the stage plays that he did, you look through his writings. Like Mormons are all over the place. Like, why haven't historians brought some of the questions that you brought and dug further to really reveal, just how much they intersected? Why haven't we written about this before?
I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that Cody, when he gains his greatest popularity, has moved away from sort of anti-Mormon tropes in his storytelling and in his plays. That it's really at the beginning of his stage career and the growth of his fame that he is using these negative sort of anti-Mormon tropes and stereotypes to build himself up. By the time that he is really gaining popularity, it has to do with coming on the heels of the Custer being defeated by Native peoples in the battle in 1876, and Cody going out on a scouting expedition and getting notoriety for taking the quote unquote first scalp for Custer, gaining prominence and gaining notoriety for his scouting for the U.S. Army in the Indian Wars of the West. And it's that summer of 1876 where he really gains that. He had been doing these stage plays for a few years that had focused with having Mormon characters as the enemy. And
like one of his very first theater productions, right, was an anti-Mormon play, and it was Chicago, I think.
Yes, the first play that he does is written by Ned Buntline, and it is a frankly an anti-Mormon play that presents a polygamous Mormon character trying to kidnap women into polygamy and sexual slavery, and Buffalo Bill and his friends, the heroes, rescuing that woman and dispatching the Mormon and his allies. Mm-hmm. And then there's a similar play that he does after that is in the same season that his stage performances start to they start to present that first scalp for Custer kind of on stage. He's also doing a play that's called May Cody or Lost in One, which presents his sister as being kidnapped by Mormons. So he's starting at that point to kind of dovetail into, we have this very prominent event that's happened in history with Custer's defeat, and then Cody leading, according to the stories, leading the troops and taking that first, making the first killing to avenge, Custer's death. And that is huge in American culture and American opinion at the time. And I think that's where the focus goes, is to Cody as Indian fighter, and then as Cody as sort of, as he grows in popularity, bringing Native peoples into his show and kind of helping them to be able to continue in some ways their Indian identity, and paying them to do it. Right. So that's, I think most of the focus on Cody goes in that direction in the scholarship. And
his Wild West show, and that's how we remember him.
Exactly, because that's what gets all of the popular attention from the 1880s onward is Wild West.
I mean, he's world famous. He's touring Europe with it. He's maybe one of the most famous, maybe the most famous quote unquote Westerner, globally, the most well known. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think by the end of the 19th century, he is, this is maybe a silly parallel, or maybe it's not quite adequate, but sometimes when I tell people how I perceive what Buffalo Bill would have been like, at the end of the 19th century, early 20th century, is the way that Taylor Swift is seen today. Right? She is this global phenomenon, and just has this immense following. I think that Buffalo Bill was kind of the Taylor Swift of the late 19th century. I don't know.
I think that's the pull quote that I'm going to use for this episode. Okay. Or that's like you need to add a sticker to the book that says Buffalo Bill was the Taylor Swift of the 19th century. And then you'll sell. The Swifties, they'll run with this. You'll sell so many books.
That's the goal. You
make your millions.
I'm a low key Swiftie, so I'm here for it.
I think this also speaks to, I don't know how to phrase this, but historical inertia, in a way that, because his Wild West show and him as this, larger than life frontiersman character came to be how he was best known, even critical historians didn't, like they ran with that and used that kind of as their starting point, without fully considering what happened before or what else was going on. The stories we tell, and I think this is actually where I'd like to eventually end this episode, because you talk about this at the very end of your book about the importance of storytelling. And, the stories we tell and the stories we don't tell, they matter in the day, but they also matter 100 years later, because it very much colors how the questions that even critical historians might ask about a subject. It's kind of a really great illustration of that. So after the Johnson's army thing, supposedly, he then is, 15-ish years doing all kinds of things out on the frontier. And he, as you noted, 1872, his first theater production. Okay. And he goes along and does those for quite a few years. And eventually that morphs into him being this great showman and the Wild West show and all of that. And then, then we're off to the races. But in all of that, and you already mentioned this, in the Wild West show, like Native peoples are involved. There's often a villain, right? In those plays, some of the plays, the Mormons were the villain. In the Wild West show, it may be others. But in all of those, there's this underlying theme of taming the West's supposedly uncivilized barbarians, right? Be it Native peoples or Mormons. This is something Paul Reeve does so well in his book, Religion of a Different Color, talking about the parallels of how people talked about Native peoples and how they talked about Mormons. Did you find lots of resonance there in the Buffalo Bills story about how he was talking about Mormons or talking about Native peoples or talking about other elements of the untamed West that had to be civilized before it could be integrated into the nation proper.
They seem to be caricatures, kind of on an equal playing field, whether it's Mormons, Native peoples, the Irish are occasionally in that mix.
And in popular media later, the Chinese are very much kind of brought into that. I don't know if Buffalo Bill did much with the Chinese in the Wild West show.
No, okay. not that I'm aware of.
But in broader popular media and newspapers, they're very much brought in as like kind of the new villain on the scene.
Yeah, they all kind of get, I think, lumped together in this grouping of unwanted elements, unwanted characters. And, Buffalo Bill's character is representative of the, Western American man, the archetype of what, quote unquote, we Americans want in the West. We want this to be a place for white men to bring their white families and build it up, have a space to build according to their dreams and desires. And in order to do that, there are certain elements that need to be tamed, that need to be controlled. And the groups that we've talked about were among those peoples that needed to be tamed and controlled. And I think what's interesting about it is that there's that symbolic or personas that are, in those places of taming. And as we move further into the story, it moves from not just people that need to be tamed, but land, environment, that needs to be tamed and controlled. But it also needs to be controlled by that same white male archetype, not by the others.
Yeah, it needs to be controlled by the right people.
Exactly.
People who've proven. I mean, this is what your first book was a lot about, unpopular sovereignty. Is that Mormons they were white, although Paul Reeves suggested in popular depictions they often were not portrayed as white.
Right.
But are they worthy of citizenship? Are they worthy of sovereignty? Have they proved themselves that they can, be trusted in American democracy? And for a long while, they were not trusted.
They weren't trusted largely because they're things we've already talked about, the way that they've been portrayed, and as religious deviants, as polygamists, as people who are not doing the things the right American way for the time.
Well, you already, as you were talking, I started thinking, oh my goodness, we have a perfect segue coming up. This is going to be just the most genius podcast moment. And then you totally poached it. You already mentioned of peoples that need to be controlled, but also the environment, the land. And this is the perfect segue that I should have planned ahead of time. It's fun that you put your book in, is it 2 acts, Act 1 and Act 2, like a stage play? That was very, very cute. I like that. But so Act 1 is about all of this stuff with the theater stuff and the Wild West show and all these early interactions and negative portrayals of Mormons. Act 2, we have a hard pivot. By now we're into the 1890s. We've had the Columbia World Exposition in Chicago, where the Mormons make a prominent display of what they've accomplished. They're not doing the polygamy thing anymore. They're ready to enter the American mainstream. They've and really, they're building these huge edifices, these temples. They've taken this. So described, like this barren wasteland of a desert, as it was portrayed, and made the desert blossom like a rose, to use that biblical imagery, which they use as well, right? And so they're presenting a very different front. And Cody is there. He's right outside, right? He sets up kind of his rival show just outside of the out of the fairgrounds, and has this huge Wild West show there as well. But it's in this moment that he is looking to maybe retire from traveling. He's invested in some land, as you mentioned, in Wyoming's Bighorn Basin. Um, by the mid 1890s, I think it was, he gets some investors to come in because he says to do this we need irrigation, right? And they build a big canal, but it was a flood that damaged it. It kind of gets damaged. It costs a lot to maintain and fix it, and he's diverting money to his Wild West show instead. But long story, by the turn of the century, he's in desperate need of some settlers to come in and to help him make something of this region and get him a return on his investment. And oops, the Westerners who have most recently demonstrated to the nation that they are the ones who can make the desert blossom like a rose, who are the master irrigation, construction, whatever. They know that infrastructure. It's the very people he'd been maligning for so many years. It's those Mormons. So how does his public rhetoric about Mormons kind of change during this era in the 1890s? Maybe before he even realizes that, hey, maybe I need to try to recruit them to settle, at that moment than after. How do we see this evolution in how he talks about Latter-day Saints?
Cody is I think both a mirror and a forerunner of some of the public rhetoric on Latter-day Saints. It starts for him in 1892, late 1892. He goes out to the Grand Canyon to take a trip, to try to find. He really wants to find a game preserve in the West, and so he hears about some land on the Arizona Strip.
Oh, yeah, like the Kaibab Plateau, right?
Right.
Was the area he was kind of looking at? Yeah.
Yeah, and he's hearing about this from one of Brigham Young's sons, and he hears more about this through a person named Junius Wells, who organizes the trip for Cody to come out from the eastern United States down to the Grand Canyon, and then they basically hike the Grand Canyon and then come through a bunch of towns in Utah before they get to Salt Lake City. And
what year is this in?
This is in 1892. So this is right before, this is 6 months before he's going to Chicago to, wow the world with the Wild West show. And this is the trip that is really the pivot point for Cody. I think that he sees with his own eyes, not through the eyes of newspapers and other stories and other things. He sees with his own eyes what it's like to live in Latter-day Saint communities, what they've done in some of these places. Going through Kanab, Kanab, Utah is, not exactly like a place that you would think, hey, there's going to be a thriving community here in the 1890s, and yet they pass through and they have irrigation canals set up, and they have some agriculture going on, and they have nice homes, and the people are very friendly. And then
he had been to Utah, he'd been to Salt Lake.
He'd been to Salt Lake to perform a couple of times.
Yeah, but coming up through, and in the Salt Lake Valley, it is dry, where it's high desert, but there's these large rivers that come down. There's a lot of green, even without irrigation, along the Wasatch Front. But coming up through southern Utah and all these Mormon settlements, very different landscape.
Different landscape, but the same approach, right? The same approach to sort of controlling the land through irrigation and agriculture. And he's sees this in these towns, and then gets to Salt Lake City and has a meeting with the first presidency of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints for the first time, has a good interaction with them. And what him and there's a gentleman with him named Prentice Ingraham, who is somebody who wrote, he was a writer that wrote for Cody. They get interviewed by the New York newspapers about this trip, and they're beaming about it. They're beaming about the people. They're calling them law-abiding, energetic, industrious, thrifty people, and it's a
complete about face.
It's kind of an about face, and Cody himself starts to use that phraseology of blossom as the rose. So whether it's because he hears Latter-day Saints in Utah saying it, or however he comes across it, he starts using that same rhetoric. And he says, look, like, basically I've seen it with my own eyes. He writes to a land speculator in 1898. He says that, I'm building up this place in Northwest Wyoming. I've invested a lot in it. And he says that the possibilities of this region are greater than, anywhere, basically. And we, to develop it, only have to look at what the Mormons have done. When they came in, it was desolate deserts, and they've made it blossom as the rose. Like those are the words that he used. And he says, and today, speaking in 1898, there is no more prosperous and wealthy state on the continent than Utah.
So if the Mormons can do it in the desert in Utah, what could they do in?
Well, what can we, like, if we're like these, we should be able to do it even better, right? Yeah. Like they've been able to do it there. We can do it better in these other places in the West, in particular, where he was really trying to build up was Northwest Wyoming. And so he is a really strong public advocate for like Latter-day Saint abilities to grow communities in very arid regions.
Well, but here's the question, and maybe there's no answer.
Okay.
Did he have an actual change of heart? Did he realize, oh, I was totally wrong about these people? He had met Mormons before.
Sure.
Like, I don't believe that he 100% bought into these, outrageously negative anti-Mormon, tropes and stereotypes, right? Do you think he had an actual change of heart, or is this just him being a very savvy businessman, realizing I might need these people as allies in the future? Put on your speculation hat. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't have any hard evidence that, from Cody's words, from his letters or anything like that says, hey, I really think differently about these people than before.
He doesn't like write it out like, wow, I really was wrong about this. Yeah.
Right. But I think the amount of public rhetoric that you see about what he says in various venues, not just when he's specifically asked about trips to Utah, not just when he's in Utah, he writes, in the ways that he's trying to advertise the Bighorn Basin, that he's writing for, Success Magazine and in these other venues that he invokes Latter-day Saints. He invokes Brigham Young. He invokes like that positivity about them. And so, I think that he has changed his view maybe on a lot of things. And I think if you look at Buffalo Bill's life in these years, in these moments, I mean, he's advocating for equal pay for women who are doing the same job. He says women should be getting the same pay as men for the same job.
Like in his show, he paid them equal, right?
Right. He's advocating for Native peoples and Native rights and things like that. And so I think that
after having been an Indian killer, right? So he's evolved on a lot of things.
Exactly. I think that there's an evolution in him as a person, and in the way that he is thinking about himself within the world, but also the world. And I think that he sees a level of, I mean, there's no such thing, I guess, as fairness, but he wants to see like people who deserve to get recognized for hard work. He believed in hard work. He believed in, people getting rewarded for the work that they did, and that they should be given opportunities to do that work. And so I think in his mind, at least what I read in his commentary, now he does have some personal beefs that go on with some Latter-day Saints because they're trying to get more from him in the Bighorn Basin after that whole thing comes down. But he's constantly publicly saying these very positive things about Latter-day Saints, but also about other groups of people, or maybe other peoples that weren't white American men, right?
Yeah.
And so whether that's also international performers that are coming to his show, he has this kind of shift in the way that he's thinking about them. And so I think that Latter-day Saints fit in to that shift. And so I guess if I had to speculate, I would say that he is thinking differently about him. I think that he's not dumb, right? He sees the business opportunity as well, but I don't think that he's going to go on this much of a limb and invest this much into this group of people. I mean, he's writing to railroad executives about Latter-day Saints coming and settling in Northwest Wyoming because he thinks that will get them to build the railroad to his. He's not going to.
Which presumes that they have a good reputation as settlers, as pioneers, right?
As settlers, people who will build necessary infrastructure to make a community grow up. And I don't think you do that if you really don't think much of the people.
But so, like, what's the scene though? There's like, so, you know, in that trip he meets with the First Presidency after the Grand Canyon. He meets with them again, you know, I don't remember what year it was, 1900 or 01 or 02. Like, but there's this anti-Mormon elephant in the room as he's meeting with church leaders, right? Like, he staged anti-Mormon plays in Salt Lake City. They knew what he had been saying. Does he or Latter-day Saint leaders or Latter-day Saint newspapers, do they ever address this anti-Mormon elephant in the room as he's now coming to try to court them?
It's never addressed in any of the evidence that I've seen. I think that maybe
it was just best for everyone involved to just like move on.
Well,
the Mormons don't want to dwell on the anti-Mormon plays, and neither does Cody, right?
Right. And I do think that there's some element of, you know, purposeful forgetting. And, you know, by 1902, when Buffalo Bill and the whole Wild West are in Salt Lake, and Buffalo Bill and his daughter Irma are meeting with the First Presidency of the church again and having these things, and the reporters are asking Buffalo Bill what they talked about, and he's giving all of this praise to Latter-day Saints. He's not. Nobody wants to dredge that up from the past. They're all just excited that. Think about, like, the most famous person in the world at the time is saying all these glowing things about your people. I mean, it would be silly for them to say, hey, remember when he used to do these things that portrayed us super negatively, and that was only like a couple of decades ago.
Yeah.
You know, so if we go back to the Taylor Swift analogy, I mean, think about, you know, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints today. If there was some interaction that happened, whether it was, you know, a Taylor Swift business opportunity or whatever, and that she went and met with the First Presidency of the church and then came out of that meeting and was saying really positive things about the church, even if she had at some point, and I don't think that she's ever spoken about it. So don't anybody
if
out
she
there,
had said something negative,
don't think that I'm making up that there's something out there that says that Taylor Swift is negative about Mormons or whatever. That's not what I'm saying. I'm painting a hypothetical to say, if that happened, everybody that you know, is a member of the church and otherwise would be like, oh, here's the most famous person in our culture, and they're saying all these really great things about it. That's what we want to hang on to. We don't want to maybe look at some of those things. So I do think that there's a bit of maybe purposeful forgetting, at least on the part of Latter-day Saints. And maybe for Buffalo Bill, he just says, hey, like, let's just move forward and let's just build on this positive relationship, because that's sort of at least his public facing approach from then on. I mean, in the book, I get into some of these personal dynamics and sort of private beefs that he's having with a couple of Latter-day Saint leaders about disputes over land, but publicly it's all very praiseworthy and positive. And even his last comments before he dies that I have been able to find about what he says about Latter-day Saints are just laudatory about them. And that's how even the newspapers in Utah write about it. By this point, I don't know if there had just been a total forgetting of what and where Cody started. but even the newspaper is saying, oh, he's always been a friend to the Latter-day Saints. There's always been this positive relationship here, and that, isn't totally true, and but that's the way that they wanted to be seen in their connection with Buffalo Bill, is like, hey, even when people were dragging us as these deviants, Buffalo Bill has always been a friend and ally.
Yeah,
And
except
so,
yeah.
yeah, except for he hadn't, right? But over the
Yeah.
past, like before he died, the almost 30 years before that had been very positive. And
Yeah.
so, anybody who's not familiar with Cody's earliest career, and even maybe didn't read some of the dime novels that were still being produced, would see that exactly as that that newspaper reporter called it out, was like,
Yeah.
hey, there's been a really positive relationship for decades.
It's just wild. You include this picture of Buffalo Bill, a bunch of natives, all these like Wild West show performers in front of the Salt Lake Temple in the like summer of 1902. And, it would have been, if he had his last play had been there in 86, I think. It's like only like 15 to 16 years later. It's like unthinkable that 15 years later, he would be standing there for this photo op in front of the Latter-day Saint Temple in Salt Lake. It's pretty dramatic. So we need to get to the Bighorn Basin, and then we're probably running out of time. What is the Mormon model of settlement and irrigation that was so unique and had been so successful, that he saw on that trip up through southern Utah? And then how does it play out with bringing Latter-day Saint settlers up to the Bighorn Basin? How does it work out for them?
Latter-day Saint settlement was a very collaborative, community-based effort, but kind of based in religious ideas and an ideology of kind of supporting each other. And so in some ways, the Latter-day Saint model is not a good model, actually, even though, and I'll explain why I'm caveating this, but what Buffalo Bill saw were communities that, were thriving with canal systems and little farms, and he was like, wow, this is something we can replicate. But doing something for a religious imperative or a community-based thing where you want to see your fellow community members thrive is different than a business venture that says like, hey, I'm trying to make money off of the land by bringing water to it. And that was the capitalist model. And that was the model that Buffalo Bill, and other private irrigators, brought to it. And so part of the difference is that I don't know that Buffalo Bill totally put those two things together when he first went into this, watering the land effort that he puts forward. And he knows that he needs to give Latter-day Saints their own space to do this. And the reason he wants to have them up there is not so they can create canals into the town of Cody, but to say like, here's a community that's thriving in this area. Come and move here, into these areas where I have land.
So as a form of boosterism, like, look at this model community, look, it can be done.
Exactly. And so the results are boosteristic, but the mode of doing it was more communal than what I think the private enterprise could reproduce. And so it was, I think it's kind of a dichotomy like that what happens, what the Latter-day Saints do is they go up and they build a canal. And they do exactly what they say they're going to do. And they get water into it within, I want to say it was about less than 2 years. They're getting water, and they're getting good returns on their fields, and they're getting hired by the Burlington Railroad to build railroad. They're getting hired to build roads into Yellowstone because they're like, wow, we have something here. your Buffalo Bill was right. We can take water from the Shoshone River and irrigate this land and make it abundant and verdant and beautiful. We need the canals to do it. We need the people to do it. And they do this community-based approach to show that it's possible, but then it never really translates into major growth, because there's a difference between people kind of investing in themselves in the land and people using their money to invest privately and not fill it out. Like, it's a lot of work to dig a canal in those days, and you have to have either a lot of money that you're going to just continue to pour into irrigation development, or you have to have a lot of people who are willing to do the work for very little.
So the model that they use successfully is not a model that anyone else was prepared to follow.
Right. And I think the reason why I bring up the federal government's involvement that comes in, in the 1905 to 1909 is because private development just doesn't work out. You have to have federal funds to build the dams, to build the infrastructure. There just isn't enough private, even as much money as Buffalo Bill was making, as many wealthy friends as he had, as many investors as he talked to, he didn't have enough to truly do what was needed to make that the paradise, the pioneer's paradise that he really wanted to make it. It required the federal government program to the reclamation program to really make that happen. And I think you see that in a lot of other places in the West as well. You don't really see the growth of the towns in the places that are really encouraging prospects for town and city growth until federal funds come in to build that really necessary infrastructure. Because what the Latter-day Saints model wanted to do was like, okay, we'll do this, but we want a lot of land to do it. And we want to bring more of our people in. It wasn't so much bringing more of our people in, it was the land. Cody was like, whoa, I can't just keep giving you free land because then I lose money, and I'm losing money by trying to build up the infrastructure. And that was what the private squabbles between him and Latter-day Saint leaders were all about, was like, they wanted more land, say, hey, we're proving what you want us to prove, but we need more land to keep growing. We love it here. We want to keep growing it here. And he's like, okay, well, I just gave you a ton of land and water rights. I can't just keep giving it to you. And so that was the kind of the fight going on. Latter-day Saints are trying to get the Wyoming governor involved to say, like, hey, get Cody to relinquish his rights to this so we can keep growing. You want settlement up here too, right? Yeah, let's keep this going. And so the private funding there just isn't enough to really make the reality of the place that Buffalo Bill had always dreamed of. And so I think that's where you get the friction and the dichotomy. And then that's where, when the federal government comes in, you really see that for Cody, that possibility growing into what he always wanted to see.
Well, to wrap up, for Western history or Latter-day Saint history enthusiasts and buffs, or just for kind of general members, or the general public in the West, or just general Latter-day Saint public, what lessons about historical memory or storytelling, story forgetting, do you think we should all take away from this? Like, what can we learn? I mean, this is all super fascinating, and if you're a history geek about Buffalo Bill or the West or Mormons, you're going to eat this up. But more broadly, like, what else can the rest of our friends and family learn from this?
I think the lesson, like the overarching lesson that I take away from this story, from this history, from this evolution of what happens, is kind of the idea of checking perceptions, getting to know who people really are, getting to know what really is happening whether it's for a people or a group of people, or whether it's, within your communities or whatever, but not just taking the perception or the representation at face value, but really taking the time to understand. And I think that there's a level of understanding that happens throughout the course of this history that allows for a relationship to build and grow. And it doesn't mean that everything was always perfect. It doesn't mean that, there weren't still, moments of frustration and even, some rough words that were said among people. Those things happen. It doesn't mean that they're all one thing. It doesn't mean, oh, now everything is bad and this relationship has soured. That there's kind of a dynamic that happens, sometimes our private stories that influence the way that we understand our public interactions. And so that sort of private and public divide comes out in this as well. But for Cody, I think that his story tells us a lot about perception, how he wanted to be perceived, how he perceived others, and how those perceptions changed both of himself and of the way that he perceived others. And so I think that this aspect of how we tell stories is really important, and what stories we tell are really important. And thinking more about those stories and what they mean on an individual level and on a group level can help lead us to a level of understanding that moves beyond a perception or representation. And so I think that for me is sort of the big takeaway that I would offer.
This is how you close the book, not to spoil the ending, but you say the stories we tell are important, which is kind of what you just said. But then your last line, listening to the stories of others is even more important. And that's really good. I like that a lot. That's really important.
Yeah.
Congratulations on this book. I like to tease you that everything you've ever written has won an award. So we're just waiting to hear what this one wins. But I hope it's being well received. I really enjoyed it. So congrats on the book, Brent.
Thanks, Brendan. I will tell all your listeners that you have always been a very good friend and very good support to me. And as much as you do like to tease me and make me blush a little bit, I really appreciate your friendship through the years, and I just appreciate you and your family. We've had some good runs together, and just thanks for having me on here today to talk about Buffalo Bill and the Mormons, but just thanks more for being my friend.
Well, you're welcome, and thank you, Brent. All right, I hope to see you in person soon.
All right,
take care. Thanks for listening. I hope you'll subscribe and listen every month. Please leave us a review on whatever app or platform you're listening through, and follow us on Facebook at Writing Westward Podcast or on X or Twitter at Writing West. There you can get updates and leave comments and share episodes with your friends, family, and colleagues. Writing Westward is supported by the Charles Redd Center for Western Studies at Brigham Young University. We are an interdisciplinary research center that supports academic and public research and promotion of public understanding of the North American West. We host regular public lectures, which we live stream on our YouTube and Facebook pages, have an annual funding cycle with award, grant, and fellowship categories that nearly anyone can apply for if they are researching or working on the region from any disciplinary approach or towards any final product. Learn more at reddcenter.byu.edu. That's REDD Center. Our theme music was provided by local Utah composer Micah Dahl Anderson. His website is also linked in the show notes. As you know by now, my name is Brendan Rensing, and since I serve as the podcast host, producer, sound engineer, publicist, and everything else for the podcast, you can direct praise or critique my work. As a historian, I'm the author and editor of a number of books, articles, and chapters on the North American West, borderlands, Native peoples, genocide studies, religion, the environment, and other topics. My most prominent publications include a 2018 book, Native but Foreign: Indigenous Immigrants and Refugees in North American Borderlands, which won the Best Historical Nonfiction Book Award from the Western Writers of America, a 2019 anthology I co-edited with P. Jane Hafen, Essays on American Indian and Mormon History, which won the Metcalf Best Anthology Book Prize from the John Whitmer Historical Association, and a 2022 collection of essays I edited entitled The North American West in the 21st Century. I also recently launched and will be editing a new series for the University of New Mexico Press entitled Histories of the North American West. So send me a note if you have a manuscript to propose for publication. Here at the Red Center, I'm also general editor and project manager of a great digital public history project, Intermountain Histories. It's a free mobile app and website that curates student-researched and written micro-histories of the region, complete with archival photos, bibliographies, and more. To contact me about that project, the podcast, my own research, or anything else, head to bwrensink, that's bwrensink.org. Email me at bwrensink@byu.edu, or follow me on X Twitter at Brendan W. Rensink. Until next month, be well.